Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Greet the Week. I'm Jan Moray, and I'm here with my co-host, Mona Duncan. And we have a couple other of our guests joining us today, and we welcome our guests both live here and those who watch us later on in the recordings. And today's topic is allowing other viewpoints. Seems to me it's a very important topic, a very timely topic for what all is going on in our country right now. So Mona, why don't you get us started on this discussion?
Okay, we'll do, because we are in week, 10, 11, 12, 15, depends on what state's talking about it at the time.
Right.
Some of us are anyway, have been engaged in this longer. But right now, what I'd like you to do is just to relax and to use your imagination. And let's just picture it. We are out in the ether world, and we are floating around, and we're looking down on all the things, and we happen to see this beautiful, beautiful planet. Well, there's a whole bunch of them, but there's one in particular that we're drawn to. And as we go in a little bit closer to look at it, it just has, it's a paradise. And the life forms are so varied. There's people and animals and flowers and birds, and the weather conditions of all kinds, from snow to fog to rain and sunshine, just adds to the beauty of this paradise. And strangers that have never met each other, that you see them smiling at one another and waving and talking, and they're just getting into their natural instinct of being social. And actually, that world is still available when we look for it. Now, in the blurb for today, looking at a different point of view, I put in there that we have to hold on to our own beliefs until we find that they're, not as secure as we thought they were originally. But while holding on to your own belief, still being willing and respectful of a different belief or a different input. That to see life on a broader scope rather than our own limited preserve. And I think about, and to disregard those artificial boundaries, not to disregard the person, but to disregard the boundary that we may see as in culture or age or education. And I was just thinking this past week about my closer friends, and maybe even the few which is not a whole lot. I mean, I know a lot of people know me, but to be really close friends or even a best friend, it's pretty diverse in age and ethnicity and education and culture. And so sometimes in looking at all this stuff, I like to think about, remember back when Galileo and the people that began to see things and make changes and how they were disregarded and no one believed them. And I mean, even look at Columbus. He was just so sure the world was flat and set out to prove it. And even though he was incorrect in his beliefs and in his pursuits, look, he founded a whole new world that was unknown at that time. And so I began to ask myself and to think about it. What is it that hinders us from looking at the good in self and others and our world? What is it that hinders us in doing that?
That is a great question, Mona, and one thing that I've thought about quite a bit myself, because it seems like so many, not everybody, but especially in social media where you don't really know the other person, and it seems like it's a little safer to say things when you don't know the other person personally, is like people do get very upset when there is an opposing view, and it does conjure up emotions inside of you when you disagree with something. I mean, that's just normal for those emotions to come up when somebody's talking about something that you don't agree with. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. Doesn't mean that you're wrong. But it's just like you've got a little different point of view, and maybe there's some opportunity to talk about it in a way that we don't let the emotions get the best of us.
Right, right. So I began to think about what is it that hinders us from looking at the good in ourselves as well as in others and life in general. And I suggest that it really is a topic that's just really in the now, and that is that we fail to live in the now. Because all of us, no matter what our age is, whether we're still a child or childish, older than, we have a past, and we are pretty sure that there's going to be a future. And sometimes we get those mixed up, even though we are living today. And so I have some suggestions, not that I am the answer person, because I'm still looking. So I like to just kind of live in the mystery and not look for an answer, because there may be something that's a little bit deeper. So I want to bear witness of attitude changes in my own individual life that has led me to deeper insights into my own humanity and my own nature, and that has produced and is producing an ongoing peace and well-being in my universe. And I find that these reasoning points are, it's kind of the yin-yang, and it's something that we may give a nod to, and that yin-yang is spoken as one word. It's the positive, negative, it's the good, bad, it's the in, out, it's all of it together. It's together.
As if it's one. It's not two separate things, it's one thing.
As if it's one thing. And so I suggest that it has to be, I've already said, not living in the now. But what keeps us from living in the now is, one, holding onto the past. And we want to make today like the good old days.
Yeah.
However, when we get real honest with ourselves, I mean real honest with ourselves, those good old days maybe weren't so good.
Right. and probably our parents and grandparents didn't think those were good old days. They had other good old days that they were thinking of.
Exactly, exactly. Because if you're brought up in that, and they were aware of the Depression, they were aware of the wars, they were aware of things more than we were as children, and then even as we grew on up and you know, maybe went to service and did all that kind of stuff. But when we get real honest with ourselves, the world and our individual nation, our state, or our community, there have always been policies to war against. There have always been spread of diseases. There's always been weather changes. There's always been something to disagree about. And there will always be weeds.
There were all
You know, that's just one of those things. It's like, I heard this story the other day about this man that was traveling the South, and he went in to get something to eat. And he was very meticulous. He always got exactly the same thing. And he wanted breakfast, and he wanted his eggs a certain way, and he wanted this, and he wanted that. And so anyway, he ordered it exactly what he wanted. And so the lady brought it and put it before him, and there was his eggs, and they looked like they were cooked to order. And there was the toast, and it was just perfect. And the bacon was just fried exactly. But there was this white glob of stuff on the plate. And he said, "Oh, miss, no, what is this? I did not order, whatever this white stuff is, I did not order it." And she said, "Well, honey, child, you in the South, and you don't order grits, they just come." And you know, some things in life we don't order, it just comes. But how are we going to handle it? Are we going to appreciate it, or are we going to at least taste it and see, at least to see if, you know, is there any nutrition in this grit stuff, whatever that is? So
we
it's
always
holding
have
on
the
to
choice not to eat it. We don't have to touch it. It's not doing
exactly,
anything but sitting right there on our plate.
exactly. We always have choices. We always have choices. And whenever we make those choices, then to look and see, was it effective? Was it, you know, did it help? Did it hurt? And to see if we need to make another choice, to rethink. But we always have choices. So one is kind of holding on to the past, that good old days, even though it wasn't so good. And another is projecting hemorrhage onto the future.
Oh.
Economic depression.
I missed the word. Projecting what?
Hemorrhage. hemorrhaging, just hemorrhaging,
bleeding,
destruction, bleeding,
Oh, okay.
Disasters, that it's going to be an economic depression. And you know what? There's a lot of truth to that. The global warming, the water levels are diminishing, pollution of the air and spread of diseases, weather changes. And there are legitimate indications, some facts that's showing that, you know what, there's a lot of reality to that. But as we live in the now, live today, truth and values and perception and all of those woo-woo words everybody has them. There's no doubt about that. And so we're not even going there. We're going to look at, we don't even know what our true nature is. I mean, I think of the fact that I'll look at something and I think I want this, and then I get it, and
right.
well, I've got it, but so what? And we don't really know what we want. We don't really know our true nature. And I don't know that we can. Maybe that's part of the self-evaluating and the thinking through. Gary Carini of the Baylor School of Entrepreneur, I interviewed him back when I wrote my book, Creating Value. And he said that value is an art, but it's not a recipe. So it's part of our personality, but it's not a recipe.
It's different for everybody. Just because you think something is a value, another person might not appreciate it the way you do. And,
right.
and that's not necessarily good or bad. It just makes us unique. It makes us who we are.
Yeah, and it's appreciating that not only in ourselves. Sometimes we think that we put ourselves as being too unique and too special.
Yeah.
And whenever we realize that maybe that uniqueness and special is what really, well, sometimes when we refer to someone as a character, we don't mean it a good way.
Right.
That we are more alike than we are different. And really, the bottom line is other people reflect some part of our life to us. And sometimes we like it, and sometimes we don't. And it's, Dionne Warwick saying, Burt Bacharach's song, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love." Mm-hmm. It's the only thing there's just not enough of. And it's not just for some, but it's for everyone. So it goes back to that genuine, real, often the genuine regard of one another. Even though I may think you're a little bonkers. And even though you may think I'm a little bonkers. Again, it's appreciating. And well, I'm going to get to a minute in maybe just kind of some of the 1, 2, 3s of possibilities, not answers, but possibilities. And one of those is, I'll go ahead and speak it out now. And one of those is to set yourself up to be a lifelong learner. That whenever I am really so disgusted with someone else, what are they showing me about me? Ouch.
Yeah.
And as I can be a lifelong learner, maybe I can begin to see more of my own true nature.
And to start looking inside of yourself instead of finding fault with that other person or finding that they're the problem, is to say, okay, what is this? Why is this bringing up all this emotion inside of me? What's going on here?
Right. And not only that, it's not finding fault. It's not even finding fault in yourself. I mean, it's not accusing. It's not blaming. It is realizing that, ouch, I do have ketchup on my face. Do you want anyone to tell you have something on your face so that you can take care of it or not? And if we had this guy, well, and he still is a friend, but he would just eat randomly, and he would have stuff all over him, and he just didn't care.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, here's a napkin. Why don't you use that? But sometimes it's really for our own good, for people to, or at least to consider the fact that maybe I could be a better friend, or maybe I would have, anyway, maybe, just maybe, rather than placing a blame, realizing that I do have something that needs to be corrected. And getting honest with it, not to say, oh, well, I'm the messiest person in the world. as in, dropping something on everybody occasionally drops something on themselves. And so it's not to label yourself as a miscreant or whatever. It's to honestly look at the fact, well, I'm getting old and obviously my balance or my coordination or my whatever is not what it once was. And maybe if I'll go a little slower, because as we self-evaluate, we can begin to look at those things. It's realizing that life is purposeful and that there's no such thing as an accident. And, we may want to buck against that we're not victims. As a matter of fact, we are equally co-creators. And for that, no such thing as an accident, all the conditions were met for it to have happened, or it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And sometimes that all the conditions being met may have been my passivity. Or sometimes it may have been too outspoken that contributed to it.
Yeah, for me, it's the passivity thing where it's like, it's no big deal. It's not a problem. I'm going to take care of it. But then you've got just too many straws on that camel's back, and one more little thing gets added on there, and then woo, everything goes crazy. And it's like, wow, that wasn't such a big thing. But what were all these other things that I acted like weren't important, didn't matter?
And they really were.
Yeah.
And something that I learned, in life in general, but marriage in particular, is to look at what is a deal. And I would do that too. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But those deals began to pack up and pack up and pack up to the point that it was about to be a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. And I began to ask myself, is this a deal breaker? Well, it can be if it's left unaddressed.
Right.
And so it is, but not doing it then because I'm too into my ego.
Right.
Wait until I can calm down and be in a rational, sane mind where there's some peace, and I am appreciating that person, for who they are, for their quirky personality. That may be pointing out my quirky personality that I don't want to admit to.
Yeah, I find that it's real difficult with your children because and I don't know, I think everybody feels this way, but there's always a part of you in that child that you feel like you're a part of that child, and you see them doing things that you would never do, but you know that that's their personality. It's not that it's a bad thing, but it's just different than what you would do. Doesn't mean that your way was right, but it still just gets to you that they're doing something differently from the way you would have done it. And as much as you try to accept that it's their life, they're free to choose whatever they want to do, it gets you.
Right. I do understand that. It's like, I scorned this.
Right.
And what was the mixture that went into it? Because it's not just the two people. It's not just the male and the female that produces that child, regardless of what the parentage is. It is a collection of aunts and uncles and grandparents and lots of people from way back. Mm-hmm. And I know I had someone one time began to point out some things about my daughter. Oh, she's just like so-and-so. And I thought, oh, no. I don't think so. And I mean, it was, but you know what? It's okay to be like so-and-so.
Yeah.
It's okay if it's your true nature. And
right. And that's an important point too. You don't want to pretend to be someone you're not because you think that that's what others expect of you. I mean, I would never want a child of mine to act a certain way because they want my approval, and they think that if they don't act that way, I won't approve. And that's because then they're not being true to themselves.
Exactly. So living in the now is, learning to respect all people and knowing that each one has infinite worth and value, even though they're different from us, and see things differently. It's taking civil means to settle a disagreement or to settle that deal, you know, and letting that be settled within us. It's, I remember back whenever 9/11, and not long after that, we was at a family reunion, and one of the cousins was talking about they was, you know, true red-blooded Americans and patriotic and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I was thinking, oh, right. And then they kept on speaking. And sometimes we're okay when we don't keep on speaking. And they kept on talking about how red-blooded American they were, and that they just was going to talk, we ought to round up all of the foreigners and just ship them back to wherever they came from. And I said, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I think not. I think not. Matter of fact, there isn't any of us except a Native American Indian that has their original soil right here on America. And you know what? Whenever we get to thinking that we are more special than someone else, we're bringing a void into our own life. You know, we can get real teary-eyed and singing Bates's song, America the Beautiful. But it's not just golden graves of, you know, grains of sand and purple mountains majesty. It's also the diversity of the people that makes it so beautiful. That makes it so beautiful. And not only the diversity of people in general, but their ideas too.
Yeah,
their ideas too.
Right.
Yeah. I have just recently reagreed to be on the board of the Chalk Bluff Water Department. And I don't want to, but I feel like I need to. I was served for several years, probably about 20 years ago, well, about 25 years ago now. And, you know, I kind of like sometimes to go back to the good old days, because we always had, I live in Waco. Our physical address is Waco, but we're in Waco's ETJ, which means.
Oh, Mona just froze for me. How about for everybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost her.
Okay, so Mona, if you can hear us, you are frozen right now. We lost you. I still see your picture. However, I don't hear anything. Oh, there, we lost her picture now. So, well, I was kind of interested in her story there as to what new thing she was joining. But I guess for me, you know, I tend to be pretty passive. But yeah, when something gets to me that I feel like I need to speak up, I get involved and I do take a stand. But it does take a lot to get me to do that, because I don't handle people disagreeing with me. Well, I do for the most part. But we all do. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, and giving feedback, and it's hard to receive some kind of feedback sometimes, and I think like right now with all the staying at home, and can I go out? Do I go out? Should I go out? Should I allow people to my home? What about family? It does create a bit of a stress, and so some of the things that we might not get upset about before bother us more these days than it did in the past. So I'm not real good at just talking my own, what I'm thinking here, and I'm going to open up the mic to anybody else who wants to chime in and give their thoughts about what we've been talking about and what's going on.
I kind of wonder. Oh, I kind of wonder how often anger gets in the way of solving any kind of a problem. And I find that very often you try to discuss a lot of things, but if you can do it without anger, you can have a decent discussion and maybe resolve something, and maybe come to some agreement. But if anger comes in, always you have a negative result of whatever the discussion was about. And I
Yeah,
think
with
anger is almost it's almost, I don't know, in my experience, it's almost the worst thing about humanity. And
but see,
there is,
that's another thing to understand about people is that anger does cause problems. And so to try to acknowledge the anger and acknowledge the other emotions behind it. I know I see Sue sitting there, and Sue's one of the faculty. Glasser talked about anger as being, I think he talked about people who were depressed or sad. A lot of times they were angry, but it came out as depression and sadness. And so, I mean, anger is a very basic emotion, but there are a lot of other emotions that are tied to it. There's probably a core emotion that is the reason for the anger.
Well, I think it also talks about, though, if somebody is really angry, and if we go back to Dr. Glass's work and think about the total behavior system, so it's all total. So that's the emotion is like, if you think about the car with the 4 tires.
Mm-hmm.
So emotion and physiology being in the back wheels, and thinking and acting the front wheels. If we have that, so I mean, I would want to know, what is somebody thinking when they're that angry?
Right.
You know, what are they thinking? And very often, I think what we object to and what we're offended by are the actions that people are taking when they're angry. You know, so when somebody's angry and they're yelling and they're screaming and they're hollering and they're hitting, you go, no, wait a minute, this is not serving any purpose. This is just, you know, but it's a way, how can I express anger, and for us to help people through that?
Right.
You know, as opposed to raging. Like, is there a way, and what are they thinking? And are there other ways to do it? Because it may not be as productive.
Right. I did get a text from Mona. Power went out at her house.
Oh.
So everything is powering back up. So she may or may not join us. So
Oh my goodness.
So Alice, I noticed you had a comment.
Yes, a couple of times what Mona said made me question, and I hate to bring this up but I will. Where does evil? Is there any recognition in Glasser's quality world picture of what to do with evil in our lives? Obviously, we try not to be around evil, or we don't recognize evil. But, you know, like Sue was saying, you know, talk to the person about anger, and a lot of what you say is hopeful, but there are just some people, many people on this earth that are evil. What do we do about that? What is Glasser, and what do you all say about that?
Some of it, I think, Alice, if you go back to the total behavior system, so if somebody is evil, what are they thinking? What are they actually thinking? And to what extent is it not appropriate? You know, so I mean, I know, Al, you do a lot of work, you know, in studying the Holocaust and what have you. So now if you look at what went on during the Holocaust, for people to think that all Jews should be killed, you know, that the Jews don't serve a place on this earth, you know, and perhaps as people are thinking now, no, I'm so sorry. Is it evil? You're Muslim. We don't want you here. You know, so what's the thought behind it? And it may not be an acceptance of it. So maybe it's that, you know, maybe it is the idea, like, is there a line somewhere that just says, no, this is no longer acceptable. You know, this is, I mean, I can think back many, many years ago, in the city of Buffalo, we actually had a murder of a doctor who was performing abortions.
Right. I remember that.
And you just kind of go, okay, wait a second though. If all life has meaning and all life is precious, you're disagreeing with this doctor's practices, but you've just shot him. you know, it's, I mean, you know, you just look and go, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And where's the idea that, okay, no, this is not acceptable. Here's the line. No, you may not do this.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
Dr. Glasser did talk about that.
And one thing I do remember reading about in Glasser's work is you just make sure you're not causing harm
Right.
to anybody else. And so, you know, that's the thing to think about. But then also when you talk about good and evil, I mean, you've got people with different belief systems and they believe that this is okay, it's acceptable. We may find it repulsive, but it's in another culture, it's acceptable. And so where do you draw the line there? And at that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording because we are out of time. So thank you to everybody who came in and watched this on the replay. Many, many thanks to people who are here live. We certainly do appreciate you. And we'll see you again. We will be here next week. I think next week is Memorial Day, but we do have a broadcast planned for next Monday as well. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.